So what are my 5 favorite books when it comes to Okinawan karate? Number 1 that anyone of a certain age, this would have started the journey for us. Okinawan Karate, Teachers, Styles and Secret Techniques by Mr. Mark Bishop. Now, those of you old enough to remember the old magazine called Fighting Arts International by Terry O'Neill. Great publication that was coming out of England back in I think the 80s it started. It ran all the way through the 90s, and it was a real shame when it eventually folded, because in my opinion, it was by far the best martial arts magazine out there. Now within that, there was a monthly column by Mr. Mark Bishop which chronicled his journey to Okinawa, his training experiences out there, the people he met, the dojo he trained at. And for me, that was the main thing I looked forward to each month in that magazine. So when this book eventually came out, Okinawan Karate, Teachers, Styles and Secret Techniques, this one was my go-to when it came to understanding the basics of Okinawan Karate, understanding the who's who were the head teachers at that time, the lineages of these various styles, the differences between the styles, the so-called peculiarities, and also an introduction to the fairly still unknown system of Goju-Ryu, which is still somewhat of a mystery, even though some of it's now coming out. A very fantastical book in that a lot of, should we say, storytelling involved, certainly when it comes to the feats that people could do, some of the historical mythology and almost superhuman abilities of these people that, you know, in hindsight are laughable at times. But it was a somewhat romanticized story of Okinawan Karate and what was possible. And one that certainly for me sowed the seeds of wanting to eventually go to the island and do my own research, meet some of these people while they were still living. Because unfortunately, if you go through this book now, pretty much every single teacher featured in here has since passed away. So it captures a real golden era in Okinawan Karate. Number 2, when it comes to Goju-Ryu, controversial, but I love the history of karate by Morio Higaonna. Now, again, I can remember getting this book when it first came out. I was 17 at the time. I was still studying Kyokushin Kai. But Kyokushin having a lot of different kata that came from Goju-Ryu, I gravitated towards the Goju kata. I loved Seiyunshin, loved Saifa, loved Sanseiru. So I favoured the Goju-Ryu. Anyway, you know, after being really interested in going out to Okinawa as a result of Mark Bishop's writings, I remember getting hold of this book after having been fascinated by the Way of the Warrior TE program, which featured Morio Higaonna. That, for many of us, was probably our first glimpse of Okinawan Goju-Ryu, and sowed the seed again for many of us to want to eventually go to the island, train with Morio Higaonna, and then eventually I think we all found our own route away from there. But this book, so starting with, you know, a lot of Okinawan history in there, and again, you know, look at it not through the eyes of a scholar, or, you know, it's quite a tongue-in-cheek book in that it's oral testimony, it's what's passed down from teacher to student, it's the history of things as he understood it himself, as was told to him by people. Not a scholarly book by any means. You won't find hundreds of footnotes or this and that. It's, what you see is what you get. Now, goes on to provide a little bit of backstory about Morio Higaonna training in China. Some really nice oral stories attributed to him. Again, probably all nonsense, but it's nice to read and nice to allow that little bit of mysticism around it. Early years of Miyagi Chojun, the formation of Goju-Ryu, what he taught, who he learnt from, who he taught when, all the way through World War II and the struggles he encountered as part of that, and then up to post-war and the aftermath of that, and ultimately what happened with his passing. Now, although a lot of the history in this is very controversial, inaccurate, downright lies in places, it's still, in my opinion, a very important book because there is a lot of oral history in there when it comes to Goju-Ryu. This copy is also signed by Higaonna Sensei, which is cool. But my favourite part of it, in the back, there are a lot of interviews with first generation students of Miyagi Chojun, and that for me is where the value of this book can be found. It's in the back, inside these interviews, because there's the odd sentence here and there, the odd little historical tidbit or clue that can send you down rabbit holes and keep you researching for many, many years. So in my opinion, especially if you're a student of Goju-Ryu, this is a must-have in your collection. Book number 3, The Study of China Hand Techniques by Morinobu Itaman. This one was translated by Mr. Mario McKenna. Now, the sort of pre-war, post-war books on karate are largely crap, if I'm honest. How to do a basic punch, how to do a basic head block, applications that are borderline laughable. This book is the exception because within it, what you will find is some actually fairly solid practical advice. There's a lot of stuff on there on the Hojo Undo. There's bits in there from the Bubishi. Some of the practical advice when it comes to application is actually quite solid. I think, in this opinion, this gives a good glimpse into the type of karate that was popular pre-war and certainly outside of the schooling system. So a lot of what you see in the early books, in my opinion, was more high school karate or university karate, physical training to make your body stronger, give you a resilient physique, etc. for eventually the war effort. This one, I think, encaptures a little bit more accurately how training was done outside of that sphere of influence. So I think you'll get a little bit more of an idea of what was going on in the Shorin-ryu and the Nahate before it got too stylized, before it got too codified, and before it got too toned down in order to appeal to the masses. So this one, I think, is a real good glimpse behind the curtain of what eventually became popular. And don't be put off by the front cover and the nonsensical application there. It gets better inside, so trust me, add this one to your collection. Book number 4, Tales of Okinawan's Great Masters by Nagamine Shoshin Sensei, translated by Patrick McCarthy. Again, I can remember getting on a waiting list to get this book when it first came out. Now, I really enjoyed this book. Nagamine Sensei at the time was a very good historian when it came to Okinawan martial arts. He had access to everybody. As a result, a lot of what you find in here is oral testimony from the families of these guys, from the downstream of the pioneers of karate. A lot of oral tradition from Okinawa. I think it gives a real good glimpse into the kind of the mentality of Okinawan karate, the philosophy of Okinawan karate, not just stories of who did what and when. I think this gives an overall really good flavour of kind of the mindset of practitioners, what they aim to achieve through their training outside the realms of just punch, kick, strike. This gives a real glimpse into Okinawan culture in general, into the type of characteristics that were sought after as a bushi, or a man of martial arts in the Ryukyu kingdom, the expectations of such a man and why they were revered, not just in martial arts circles, but as leaders of society in general. So again, if you can get hold of this one, highly recommend this one. And finally, this is my secret book. not a lot of people have read this one. So, a narrative of an expedition of an American squadron to the China Seas and Japan. Now, this is the expedition from Commodore Perry, who landed in Okinawa, basically forced their way into Shuri, demanded a meeting with the king, and then everything that came off the back of that. But the reason I like this book is that it gives a glimpse into a time that is long gone in Okinawa. So it gives you a real good idea of sort of like the 1800s, the social structures, the traditions, the mentality, the way people would speak to each other, the type of dress, the type of terrain. It is a real glimpse into a past, an era that no longer exists. So you're looking around that mid-1800s, so prior to Kanryo Higaonna Sensei, prior to Itosu, around the same time that Bushi Matsumura would have been serving in the royal courts. Again, just to build a background idea of the culture, the historical premise that the arts evolved from. I think this is a great one. It's very readable, despite it being a kind of like a diary of sorts of the expedition. Very, very readable. Not just Okinawa, but also Korea. There's a little bit of China in there. So it just gives you a real good overview of where karate came from. So that for me is my 5 top books when it comes to Okinawan karate. Let me know if there's any of your favorites that I've missed off in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you wouldn't mind, because it helps the channel out massively. See you soon.